The Tonight Show studio in Burbank ran cold in October 1972, the way television studios always run cold. The stage lights generate enough heat that the air conditioning runs constantly to compensate, and the result is that everyone waiting in the wings feels the chill, while the people under the lights feel nothing but warmth. Johnny Carson was at his desk, going over his notes, and despite his decade of experience with live television, he was more unsettled than usual. The two guests scheduled for that night were exactly the kind of people who produced either extraordinary television or serious problems, and in his experience, those two outcomes were separated by very little. The first guest was already in the green room. Her name was Sakan Payungkam. She was 27 years old, and she had come from Thailand specifically for this appearance. She was the reigning women's Muay Thai champion of Thailand, a title she had held for 3 consecutive years, and she had been brought to the show by a cultural liaison organization that had been trying for months to introduce Muay Thai to American audiences through mainstream television. She spoke English well, having studied it seriously for several years, and she had strong opinions about martial arts that she had never had any difficulty expressing. Her record was 38 wins, 0 losses, 22 knockouts. The Bangkok sporting press had been running out of ways to describe her dominance and had settled on a consensus approach, which was to simply list her record and let the numbers speak. The numbers spoke clearly. She was not aware that the show had booked a second guest for her segment. Down the hall, in a smaller dressing room, Bruce Lee sat with his wife Linda, who had come to Burbank for the taping. Enter the Dragon was in post-production, approaching its planned release, and his public profile was building in a way that was new and significant. Fred de Cordova, the show's producer, had been trying to get Bruce back for months. He had finally succeeded with one condition attached, the same condition Bruce always requested. He wanted to come out as a surprise. He said it made for better television. Fred agreed, because Fred was right about television, and Bruce was right about television, and together they were right about this specifically in a way that nobody fully understood until the night it happened. Johnny knew Bruce was coming. The camera operators knew. The floor director knew. The studio audience did not know, and Sakan Payungkam did not know. That last part was going to matter. Linda adjusted Bruce's collar. She told him 70 million people were expected to watch this particular episode, and that it would be the moment the rest of America met him properly. Bruce said he knew. He said it was just talking, just being honest, just answering questions. Linda said that was all it needed to be. He took a breath. He understood what the evening could mean. 70 million people forming an opinion was not a small thing. The show started at 8:30. Johnny's monologue, a brief first segment, and then the introduction for the second segment, which was Sakan. She walked out to solid applause, the audience responding to the visual of someone who carried herself with the specific physical confidence of a person who has spent years in serious training. She was 5'6" and compact, in the way that trained fighters are compact, nothing in her frame existing without purpose. She sat on the couch and crossed her legs and looked around the studio with the calm assessment of someone who finds most situations manageable. Johnny welcomed her. He asked about Muay Thai, about what made it distinctive, about how it felt to be a champion in a discipline most Americans didn't know. She answered directly and clearly, without performing modesty or performing confidence, just answering questions the way people answer questions when they know their subject completely. Johnny asked her to demonstrate something. She stood and threw 3 elbows in combination, the kind of demonstration that made the audience immediately understand they were watching technique rather than performance. Then a teep, the Muay Thai push kick, snapping out and retracting with the efficiency of something that has been drilled past conscious thought into automatic execution. The audience responded warmly. Then Johnny said he had a second guest who had been wanting to come back to the show and whose new film he was very excited to discuss. He looked at camera 1. Ladies and gentlemen, Bruce Lee. The curtain opened and Bruce walked out, and the audience responded, the wave of recognition building from the back forward as people understood what they were seeing. He crossed the stage toward the second guest chair, the one next to the couch, and as he passed the couch, he extended his hand toward Sakan. She did not take it. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She left the hand extended for 3 seconds, which on live television is a very long 3 seconds, and then she turned her eyes back toward Johnny. She did not shake his hand. The audience registered this. The specific sound of several hundred people who have witnessed something impolite and are uncertain what to do with that information passed through the studio briefly and then settled into a watchful quiet. Bruce sat down. His expression did not change significantly. He looked at Johnny, acknowledged the audience with a small nod, and settled into his chair with the ease of someone who has decided not to let the opening shape everything that follows. Johnny, professionally and without missing a beat, said, "Bruce, welcome back. I know our first guest, Sakon, has some strong feelings about martial arts. I'm curious what you think about what you just saw her demonstrate. Bruce said it was impressive. He said the conditioning in Muay Thai was real, that the elbow work required years of specific development, that the style had genuine principles behind it that he respected. Sakon said, "You have seen Muay Thai before." Bruce said he had trained with Muay Thai practitioners and studied the system seriously. Sakon said, "In movies?" The audience made the particular sound of people who have heard something pointed land. Bruce said, "In gyms, in real training, in actual exchanges." Sakon looked at him with the evaluating attention of someone who has spent years reading opponents. She said, "What I see in your films is choreography. I have watched these films. The speed is camera speed, the power is editing. What happens in a real exchange is different from what a camera shows you." Johnny leaned forward slightly with the expression of someone watching a situation he needs to be ready to manage. He said, "I think Bruce's training is genuinely." Sakon said, "I mean no personal disrespect. I am saying what is true. Film is film. Fighting is different. I have been in real exchanges since I was 17 years old, 38 of them professionally. Not one has looked like a film." Bruce said, "You're right, that film and real fighting are different. I've said the same thing. What I'd push back on is the assumption that because something appears on film, it isn't real. Everything I show in my films I can do. The camera shows it. It doesn't create it," Sakon said. "Can you prove that?" The studio went quieter than it had been. Johnny said carefully, "I think what we're doing here is having a really interesting conversation about," Sakon said. "I am asking a direct question. Can you prove that what you show in films is real, without a camera, without choreography, without an opponent who agrees to fall at the right moment?" Bruce looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said. Sakon said, "Then prove it, right here. Not a fight, a demonstration. You show me what is real, and I will show you what is real, and the people watching will decide what they see." Johnny looked at his floor director, he looked at the camera, he looked at the audience, which was watching this, with the collective focus of people who have lost interest in anything except what is happening on the couch. He made a decision. "We're going to take a quick break," he said, "and when we come back, I think we're going to give America something a little different tonight." The commercial break lasted 4 minutes. The floor director used 2 of those minutes trying to talk Sakon toward a more measured approach. Sakon listened politely and said she understood his concern and that she had no intention of causing any trouble. She simply believed that honesty was more useful than performance, and that if Bruce Lee could do what he said he could do, there was no reason not to show it. Bruce spent the 4 minutes sitting in his chair drinking water. A production assistant asked him twice if he was all right. He said he was fine. He was reading the situation the way he read everything, the way the uploaded reference script describes it, completely, and without any of the noise that self-consciousness introduces. He was thinking about what the next few minutes would actually require and what the right way through them looked like. When the cameras came back, Johnny had made the call to let it happen. Not because he wasn't nervous, because he understood television well enough to know that what was building in his studio was either going to become something people talked about for years or something they tried to forget, and the difference between those outcomes was in whether it was managed well. He was going to manage it well. "All right," he said, "we've cleared a little space. What we're going to do tonight is something I don't think this show has done before, which is a real live demonstration of 2 different martial arts traditions. No fighting, no contact intended to injure, just 2 serious practitioners showing what they know. Sakon, Bruce, is that agreeable to both of you?" Sakon stood up from the couch without waiting for more. She moved to the cleared space at the center of the stage, with the quality of someone crossing a room they consider already theirs. She stood and rolled her neck once and looked at Bruce. Bruce stood. He walked to the center of the cleared space and stood across from her. The visual was immediate. She had 3 or 4 inches on him and perhaps 30 pounds. In the context of Muay Thai, where reach and timing and the ability to generate force from the hip determined a significant portion of outcomes, that differential was not trivial. The audience was completely silent. Johnny said, "No intent to injure. This is a demonstration. Both parties have agreed to that. Whenever you're ready." Sakon moved first. A teep, the same kick she had shown in her earlier demonstration, this time directed at Bruce's midsection. Not pulled. Real speed. The speed she used in actual competition. Bruce's body shifted. Not his feet, his weight and his angle. A rotation that took his midsection offline from the kick's path by a matter of inches. The kick passed through space rather than connecting. Sakon's foot landed, and she was already following up. A right elbow at mid-range. The technique she was most feared for, coming from the position her teep had created. Bruce was inside it. He had moved into her range rather than away from it, the less expected direction, close enough that the elbow had no room to develop power, and his left forearm was already in contact with her elbow arm, not blocking but redirecting, the Wing Chun principle of meeting force at an angle that disperses rather than absorbs it. She stepped back and reset. Her expression had not changed, but something in her eyes had, the specific quality of someone receiving information that updates an estimate they held with confidence. She came again. Different combination, jab into a knee, the knee being the technique that had ended the most fights in her career. The jab landed on Bruce's forearm, which was there specifically for it. The knee found empty space. He had stepped to the outside of her lead leg before the knee came, the step so small that from most camera angles it looked like he barely moved. His right hand touched her shoulder. Light contact. 2 fingers, placed specifically, held for 1 count. The audience made the sound that audiences make when they see something they couldn't have described in advance and are now watching happen. Sakan stopped. She stood in the space and looked at her shoulder and then at Bruce. Her breathing was elevated, not from exertion, from the focused intensity of someone who has been working at full speed against an opponent who has consistently not been where she needed him. She said, "You moved inside the elbow. Inside gives you the angle advantage," Bruce said. "Outside, you're dealing with the power. Inside, the power can't develop fully." "Nobody moves inside my elbow," she said. It was not a boast, it was a statement of her experience across 3 years of championship competition. "Most people move away," Bruce said. "Away is what the technique is designed to handle." The audience applauded, not the polite applause of people acknowledging something they half understood, the genuine applause of people who had watched something be explained through demonstration rather than through words and had understood it. Sakan looked at him for a long moment. The evaluation was still happening behind her eyes, more complex now, working through more variables than it had been working through 5 minutes ago. "The touch to my shoulder," she said. "What was that?" "It was the strike I didn't throw," Bruce said. "From that position I had the angle to your neck, your jaw, your temple. I chose the shoulder instead, because this is a demonstration." Sakan absorbed this. She worked her shoulder slightly, feeling the geometry of where his fingers had been and what it implied about where else they could have been. Her expression did something that was not quite a smile, and not quite its opposite, something more honest than either. She said, "I did not shake your hand when you came out." "I noticed," Bruce said. "That was wrong," she said. "Not because of this." She gestured at the space between them. "Because you came out and offered respect, and I refused it before I knew anything about you. That was about what I had decided, before I arrived, not about what is actually here." The audience was very still. She extended her hand. Bruce took it. They shook hands in the middle of the Tonight Show stage, and the audience responded to it the way audiences respond when something unexpected resolves well, rather than resolving badly, with the specific warm noise of people who were ready for a different outcome and got a better one. Johnny, watching from his desk with the expression of a man who has been hosting this show for a decade and has just seen something he will be describing for the rest of his life, waited for the applause to settle, and then said, "I want to say, on behalf of everyone in this building, and I suspect everyone watching at home, that what just happened in the last 8 minutes is the most interesting thing that has happened on this couch all year." The audience responded to this as well. Johnny said, "Sakan, what just changed for you? Because I watched your face, and something changed." She thought about this honestly, rather than reaching for a diplomatic answer. She said, "I came here believing that what I do is real, and what he does is not real. That is a simple distinction, and I was confident in it. What I found is that the distinction is not simple, and my confidence was based on incomplete information." She paused. "I have fought 38 professional fights. I have not been in an exchange before tonight where I could not find the person I was fighting. He was consistently not where I needed him to be. That is a real thing. It requires real training that I had not accounted for," Johnny said. "Bruce, what do you want to say about tonight?" Bruce said, "Sakan is an exceptional fighter. The techniques I saw her demonstrate before the camera were real, and the training behind them is real. What happened tonight between us is not a competition, and it's not a verdict about which tradition is better. It's 2 serious people finding out something true about each other. That's what this kind of exchange should be." He paused. "The hand she extended at the end is worth more than everything that came before it." "That took more than any of the technique," the audience responded. Sakan looked at him. "You're going to make me look generous," she said. "You were generous," Bruce said. "In front of everyone. That's not a small thing." Afterward, in the corridor outside the green rooms, the floor director found them both still talking, not performing for anyone. Just talking, the way two people talk when a conversation has moved past the social layer into something more useful. Sakan was asking about footwork, specifically about the lateral step he had used before the knee, and Bruce was explaining the relationship between his own weight transfer and reading the incoming technique's trajectory. The floor director stood in the doorway for a moment and then decided not to interrupt. He told people about that corridor conversation for years afterward. He said the part that stayed with him was not the demonstration on stage, which was extraordinary. He said it was the conversation in the corridor, which was two serious people treating each other's knowledge as worth having, rather than worth defeating. He said that was rarer than anything he had seen in 3 years of live television. The episode aired to strong numbers. The 8 minutes of demonstration generated more viewer response than any segment the show had run in several months. Johnny mentioned it in his opening monologue the following Tuesday, describing it as the most interesting thing that had happened on the couch since he couldn't remember when. Sakan returned to Thailand 2 days after the taping. She fought 3 more times in the following year, winning all 3. The Bangkok press noted in the coverage of the third fight that her entry patterns had become harder to read, that she had added lateral entries to her standard approach that made opponents less certain where her combinations were going to arrive from. None of the coverage connected this to anything that had happened in a television studio in Burbank. She retired from competition 18 months after the taping. She opened a training school in Bangkok and taught for 20 years. She had one rule she established in the first week and maintained without exception for the full 2 decades. Before any technique was taught, before any conditioning, she asked her students to demonstrate a proper greeting, a proper handshake, a proper acknowledgement of the person across from them. When students asked why, she told them that the most important thing she had learned in her competitive career was not any technique. It was a lesson she learned from a corridor conversation after a television appearance in California. She said that the quality of attention you bring to the person across from you determines the quality of everything that follows. That refusing to see someone clearly because you have already decided what they are is a form of blindness that technique cannot compensate for. She said she had been blind on a stage in Burbank in October 1972 and had then been given the opportunity to see correctly, and that correcting it in front of everyone was the hardest thing she had done in her career, harder than any fight, harder than any championship, because the championship asked her to be physically exceptional and the correction asked her to be honest in public, and honesty in public requires a different kind of courage from the kind that training develops. She said she tried to teach that courage alongside the technique. She said she had mixed results. Most people found it easier to learn the technique. Bruce Lee died in July 1973, 9 months after that October taping. Sakan heard the news from a journalist, who called her for a comment. She did not give one, she said she needed time. A week later, she put a statement in the Bangkok sporting press. It was short. She said she had met Bruce Lee once, on a television program in America, and that she had not treated him with the respect he deserved when they first sat down together. She said he had not held it against her, and had instead shown her something worth knowing. She said she was glad the evening had ended the way it ended, rather than any of the other ways it could have ended, and that she thought about the handshake more than she thought about anything else that happened that night. She said she would remember him as someone who offered his hand when he had no reason to expect it would be taken. The Tonight Show episode from October 1972 became part of what got referenced when people wanted to understand what Bruce Lee actually was. Not a film performance viewed at a comfortable remove, but something witnessed live by a studio audience and 70 million viewers at home. Something that happened without preparation or choreography, in response to a genuine challenge from someone who was genuinely trying to find out if it was real. It was real. That was what the evening showed. The demonstration showed it. The corridor showed it. The handshake showed it, all in different ways and all accurately. 70 million people had watched someone refuse to shake a hand and then watched the same person offer one an hour later. The technique between those 2 moments was extraordinary, but the 2 moments themselves were the actual story, the refusal that came from assumption and the extension that came from honesty. One required courage that training develops, the other required courage that training alone cannot develop. Both happened on a Tuesday night in Burbank in 1972, and both were seen.